Hello and welcome to This Date in History, aka TDH. This show is all about the events that occurred today in years past, both recognized by actual historians, but mainly things I personally find intriguing enough for me to bring to you. The source of this information comes from the smart device application Today in History on this day. For links to the app, music, and anything else potentially interesting, check the box below. Anyway, on with the show! Today is Moon's Day, aka Monday, December 20th, 2021. In the year 69 AD, on behalf of Nero's former general Vespasian, Priscus entered Rome to claim the title of emperor. Vespasian would only rule for a decade. Moving up over 1100 years in 1192, while en route back home to England after the Third Crusade, Richard I was captured by Leopold V of Austria and later imprisoned. Skipping up about 600 years in 1803, the Louisiana Purchase, comprising of Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, and portions of North and South Dakota, Montana, Minnesota, Wyoming, Iowa, Colorado, Missouri, New Mexico, Arkansas, Texas, and finally Louisiana, was completed in New Orleans during a ceremony. In 1860, becoming the first state to attempt a secession from the United States of America, South Carolina out Texas. Jumping into the next century, in 1915, the Gallipoli Campaign, a failed invasion attempt of the Gallipoli Peninsula by Allied troops during World War I, saw its last Australian troops evacuated. Two years later, in 1917, the All-Russian Extraordinary Commission, abbreviated as VCHA, also known as Cheka, was founded, becoming the first Soviet secret police force. In 1924, after having served 5 years behind bars, Adolf Hitler was released from Landsberg prison. A bit less than 20 years later, in 1941, more commonly known as the Flying Tigers, the American volunteer group consisting of 90 aircraft evenly distributed between 3 fighter squadrons, fought their first battle in Kunming, China during World War II. In 1942, also during World War II, Calcutta, India was bombed by Japanese air forces. 4 years later, in 1946, It's a Wonderful Life, the popular Christmas film, was first released in New York City. 2 years later, in 1948, Yogyakarta, the temporary capital of the newly formed Republic of Indonesia, was captured by the Dutch military during the Indonesian National Revolution. In 1951, powering a whopping 4 entire light bulbs, the Experimental Breeder Reactor 1, aka EBR-1, the first nuclear power plant to generate electricity, was successfully tested in Arco, Idaho. In 1955, Cardiff, today being the home to slightly over 335,000 people, and being the largest city in Wales, was proclaimed the capital city of Wales, United Kingdom. 2 years later, in 1957, the initial production version of the Boeing 707 made its first flight. In 1971, Doctors Without Borders, the international aid organization, was founded in Paris, France, by Bernard Kouchner and a group of journalists. 13 years after that, in 1984, near the town of Todmorden, England, in the Pennines, a freight train carrying over 1 million liters of gasoline derailed and ignited, eventually to become one of the largest transportation tunnel fires in history, the Summit Tunnel Fire. 3 years later, in 1987, the passenger ferry Doña Paz, after having collided with the oil tanker MT Vector, sunk in the Tablas Strait of the Philippines, becoming the worst peacetime sea disaster to date. Official records stating 1,749 dead, although estimates are as high as 4,000. 12 years later, in 1999, Bosnia saw their first North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, peacekeeping activities. Also in 1999, Portugal surrendered Macau to China. Jumping up to the next millennium, in 2007, Queen Victoria, who had lived for 81 years and 243 days, lost her record as oldest monarch of the United Kingdom to Elizabeth II, who clearly needs to fight Betty White to the death, Highlander style.
There can be only one!
And in 2019, becoming the first new branch of the United States Armed Forces since 1947, the United States Space Force came to be.
Space Marines!
Births: Harvey Samuel Firestone, 1868, Robert J. Van de Graaff, 1901, Bill O'Reilly, 1905, Peter Criss, 1945, Dick Wolf, 1946, Jonah Hill, 1983. Deaths: Sacagawea, 1812, Arthur Morgan, 1916, John Steinbeck, 1968, Roy O. Disney, 1971, Dick Spooner, 1997. And that concludes the show. Once again, check the underbar for any links you may be interested in. For your dose of Passive Events Daily, I am Aoxander, and you are you. Doodles!